If you are looking for this video in Hindi, the link is down there in the description. यदि आप इस वीडियो को हिंदी में देखना चाहते हैं, तो लिंक नीचे डिस्क्रिप्शन में है।
Today, at 15:45 hours, India conducted 3 underground nuclear tests in the Pokhran range.
This was part of the brief 1-minute announcement made by India's 10th Prime Minister, the late Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, on May 11, 1998, just after India had conducted 3 successful underground nuclear tests. And today, on 15th August 2020, India's 74th Independence Day, I wanted to tell you a story. A story that spans over half a century. A story of wars, conspiracy, geopolitics, secrecy, and power struggle. A story of how a developing nation shocked the world not once but twice in a show of defiance and power. A story of how the CIA was fooled in a spectacular manner. A story of what happens when a country works as a singular entity over generations and across political party lines and governments. A story that underlines the importance of science, scientists, and engineers. And a story that should make you swell with pride and hold your head high upon seeing how far the country has come since 1947. Stick till the end of the video to get the full picture and to see how many odds India fought against in this uphill battle. August 16 is also the death anniversary of Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, an extremely well-respected figure across the political spectrum who passed away in 2018 and who is widely considered by many as one of the greatest prime ministers of the nation. So this video is also partly in homage to him. Namaste my dear friends, my name is Dhruv and welcome to the Indoverse. Pokhran is a small and remote village near the city of Jaisalmer in the Indian state of Rajasthan, around 150 kilometers from the India-Pakistan border. This generally underdeveloped and small municipality of around 30,000 people today has come in the limelight twice. Once in 1974, when India conducted its first peaceful nuclear bomb test, and then in 1998, when India proved to itself and the world that it was a fully functional nuclear power. And for India, being a nuclear power was extremely important due to geopolitical reasons, despite the countries that already possessed these weapons of mass destruction being vehemently against this, and we will get into this today. But before we enter into the details, I would like to say that I am in no manner or form in support of wars and bloodshed. Anyone who glorifies war doesn't know the horrors of it. And I just can't in good faith say that war is good when I'm sitting in the comforts of my home, as it is the soldiers who have to pay the price for my freedom. Neither do I condone the use of nuclear weapons, and I wholeheartedly agree that they are a terrible accessory of death and destruction. With that said, I also realize that wars and weapons have been an unfortunate part of human history, and circumstances in geopolitics sometimes force countries to do things that they don't really like to do. Stick till the end of the video to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. Also, as this story lasts over 5 decades, we will be assisted by this timeline that will make things a bit easier to follow, as the chronology of the events and the dates are super important to understand. Let's begin by following the first leg of my story, the 30 years between 1944 and 1974. India had started its own nuclear program in 1944 under the leadership of Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha, who is widely known as the father of Indian nuclear program, and who was authorized and supported by India's first Prime Minister, Shri Jawaharlal Nehru, after independence from the British Empire. Right after independence in 1947, India entered a year-long war with Pakistan over the state of Kashmir. During this time, in 1948, the Atomic Energy Act was passed, which was focusing on the peaceful use of atomic energy. But Nehru was clear on his stance on the usage of nuclear energy, given the realities of the world and those times. He said, "We must develop this atomic energy quite apart from war. Indeed, I think we must develop it for the purpose of using it for peaceful purposes." Of course, if we are compelled as a nation to use it for other purposes, possibly no pious sentiments of any of us will stop the nation from using it that way. In 1954, within 10 years of starting the program, Dr. Bhabha had steered it in the direction of weapon design and production, from where it grew at a fast pace till 1962. But the 5 years to follow were some of the hardest and darkest in modern Indian history. It all began with the Sino-Indian War of 1962. A surprising and swift attack during which India lost its territory to China. At this time, Nehru turned to the Soviet Union for help, but the Soviet Union was itself preoccupied with the Cuban Missile Crisis against the US, and the Russians turned down Nehru's request for arms and continued backing the Chinese. This led to the Chinese conducting their own nuclear tests in 1964 and becoming a nuclear-armed country. This is an important detail because we have to realize that this was the height of the Cold War between the US and the USSR, and both countries were stockpiling nuclear weapons and flexing their muscles as if there was no tomorrow. India needed a superpower as an ally, and it realized that USSR was not a reliable ally, and this strengthened India's decision to have its own nuclear deterrent. After China's nuclear tests, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was at that time a young member of the Indian Parliament, had said, The answer to an atom bomb is an atom bomb, nothing else. Nehru passed away in 1964, and the nuclear program was partially slowed down when Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri became the second Prime Minister of India. Shastri had to face and handle the Second Indo-Pakistan War in 1965, which ended with a ceasefire and the signing of the Tashkent Agreement after intervention of the United Nations. But this is also the period where the infamous CIA, short for the Central Intelligence Agency, started coming into play. This shadowy US government agency has been accused of and certainly involved in innumerable assassinations, destabilization of countries and governments, and general pro-US propaganda around the world. Shastri died under mysterious circumstances in Tashkent a day after signing the agreement, high up in the mountains of current-day Uzbekistan, which at that time was part of the USSR. No post-mortem was done by the Russians. The official account was that of a heart attack, but there were immediate whispers of a conspiracy and assassination using poison, attributed to the CIA to slow down India's nuclear program, as the US didn't want India and Russia to grow their influence in the region. In 1966, Dr. Bhabha too was killed when the Air India flight that he was on crashed near the mountains of Mont Blanc in Switzerland. The official reason given for the crash was a misunderstanding between Geneva Airport and the pilot about the aircraft's position near the mountain, but there have been widespread conspiracy theories that the CIA was yet again involved in this in order to paralyze India's nuclear program. After Dr. Bhabha's death, Dr. Raja Raman took over as program director, and he was subsequently involved in India's nuclear program for 40 years in his lifetime. Now we are in 1967, and Srimati Indira Gandhi, Nehru's daughter, had become the third Prime Minister of India, and work on the nuclear program resumed. She too had to handle a war with Pakistan in 1971, India's third with the country, and it led to yet another important geopolitical event, the fall of East Pakistan and the creation of a new country out of it, Bangladesh. Pakistan reacted by starting its own nuclear program in 1972. Around this time, Indira Gandhi too authorized the manufacture of a nuclear device and to start preparing for a test. This was an important undertaking which was taken under direct political supervision and had civilian scientists assisting the army. To preserve secrecy, the project employed no more than 75 scientists and engineers from 1967 to 1974. Dr. Abdul Kalam, a prominent Indian scientist who was later actively involved in the second Pokhran test and also went on to become the President of India, also arrived at the test site as the representative of the DRDO, short for Defense Research and Development Organization. Then finally, India was ready to conduct the test and face the world. The nuclear device was formerly known as the PNE, short for Peaceful Nuclear Explosive, but was generally known as the Smiling Buddha. The device was detonated on 18th May 1974, the festival day of Buddha Jayanti, which marks the birth of Gautam Buddha, and thus the name. Pokhran was chosen as a test site as there was no human presence there for many kilometers, and it was in a largely barren part of the country. This test sent literal and figurative shockwaves all over the world. India had just achieved the impossible against all odds. It had faced 4 wars, deaths of 2 prime ministers, 2 supposed assassinations of high-profile figures, and had still managed to become the world's 6th nuclear power after the US, USSR, UK, France, and China. While India stuck to its claim that the test was for peaceful purposes, it did face a lot of international pushback. Pakistan was understandably furious as it did not view the test as a peaceful nuclear explosion at all, and thus this test is said to have sped up their relatively young nuclear program. Both the US and Canada reacted negatively as well, especially as there were ongoing negotiations on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty since 1968, and both countries had also provided economic aid to India. France, being the nice friend it has always been to India, sent a congratulatory telegram to India but later withdrew it. I find this one to be quite funny, to be honest. Now let's enter the second leg of my story, the 24 years between 1974 and 1998. After the 1974 test, there was a long pause in the nuclear weapons development program, and this was mainly because of 2 reasons. Firstly, the main driving force behind the development of this device had been the motivation of the scientists rather than any kind of push from the Prime Minister, from the Indian government, or from the army. The scientists had needed no encouragement and had been moving ahead whenever they were not actively prevented. This common mission of proving that India as a country and they as scientists were capable of this feat had given the science community a unity of purpose that overcame any friction among them. But after the test, this unity was lost and the teamwork collapsed. Secondly, this was a time for a lot of political turmoil within the country. Indira Gandhi's government had fallen in 1975 after she imposed a state of emergency, another very dark period of India's recent history, and the 4th and the 5th subsequent prime ministers either opposed nuclear proliferation or were simply in office for too short to do anything about it. After the 1980 general elections, Indira Gandhi came back to power and the nuclear program began to gain momentum in 1981 under the leadership of Dr. Abdul Kalam, who we talked about recently. Meanwhile, in 1983, Pakistan too had its first successful nuclear test and became the 7th country to join the nuclear club. And then, when Indira Gandhi was assassinated in 1984, her son Rajiv Gandhi took over as the 6th Prime Minister of India. By 1989, owing to the facts that Pakistan had started creating its own nuclear stockpile and that the foreign relations between India and Pakistan were severely worsening, Rajiv Gandhi directed the country to start manufacturing its own arsenal of weapons. Shortly thereafter, in 1991, he too was assassinated due to India's involvement in Sri Lanka's ethno-civil war. In general, the period between 1989 and 1995 was extremely turbulent, not only for India but for the entire world. In 1989, there was a meteoric rise in the Islamization of Kashmir, and Pakistan had started being involved in funding terrorism activities there. The world completely changed in 1991 due to the disintegration of the USSR, which followed the fall of the Berlin Wall and the unification of Germany. In the same year, India opened up its economy after liberalization. And diplomatic tensions yet again escalated between India and Pakistan when Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto raised the Kashmir issue in the United Nations in 1995. As a response and riding the public wave of support, India's 9th Prime Minister, Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao, decided to conduct further nuclear tests. These plans were halted after American spy satellites picked up signs of preparations for nuclear testing in Pokhran. President Bill Clinton and his administration exerted enormous pressure on Rao to stop the preparations. Now, there was yet again a period of political imbalance within the country for about 2 years, and then in 1998, the BJP came into power, led by Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He publicly began lobbying for nuclear testing and declared that there is no compromise on national security. All options, including the nuclear option, will be exercised to protect security and sovereignty of the nation. On March 28, 1998, Vajpayee asked the scientists, led by Dr. Kalam, who was now the head of the DRDO, and Dr. R. Chidambaram, chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission and the Department of Atomic Energy, to make preparations in the shortest time possible, and preparations were hastily made. This test was an immense feat in itself, both in speed and in secrecy. Ever since 1995, when Rao had been pressured by Clinton, the Indian intelligence community was aware of the American spy satellites and the CIA keeping a close eye on Indian test preparations. Thus, the tests required complete secrecy both within India and also to avoid detection by other countries. The army was commissioned to prepare the test sites at Pokhran to avoid detection by the American spy satellites. Here began an immense 1.5-month game of cat and mouse between India and the CIA, where extreme measures were taken by India to ensure that the tests went undetected. All scientists were required to wear army uniforms. Work was mostly done during night, and the equipment was returned to the original place in the morning to give impression that nothing was ever moved. Bomb shafts were dug under camouflage netting, and the dugout sand was shaped like sand dunes. Cables for equipment sensors were covered with sand and concealed using native vegetation. Scientists would not depart for Pokhran in groups of 2 or 3. They traveled to destinations other than Pokhran under pseudonyms and were then transported by army. The technical staff at the test range also wore military uniforms. The bombs were flown from Mumbai to Jaisalmer in an Indian Air Force plane and then transported to Pokhran in an army convoy of 4 trucks, and this required 3 trips. All this ensured that the CIA had no idea, both through the satellites and through their on-ground assets and spies, that India was planning something so big. The timing of the tests depended on the local weather conditions, with the wind being the critical factor. By early afternoon of 11th May, the winds had died down and the test sequence was initiated. At 3:43 p.m., 3 devices were detonated. And this was when Vajpayee made the announcement that you saw at the beginning of the video. On 13th May, 2 further nuclear tests were done, and now the Indian government held a press conference and declared that India was a full-fledged nuclear state. Upon this feat, Vajpayee modified the slogan of Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan that was first perpetrated by India's second Prime Minister Shri Lal Bahadur Shastri Ji in the 1960s to Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, Jai Vigyan, which means glory to the soldiers, glory to the farmers, glory to science. In contrast to the 1974 explosion, there were no claims made that this was a peaceful test. On the contrary, the Indian government emphasized the military nature of these explosions. Brajesh Mishra, the principal secretary to Prime Minister Vajpayee, said, "These tests have established that India has a proven capability for a weaponized nuclear program." The international response was as you can expect, but India was ready to hold its ground and face all kinds of sanctions and tough talk. China was visibly very shocked, and they released statements along the lines of how they were seriously concerned about the nuclear tests conducted by India, and that the tests run counter to the current international trend and are not conducive to peace and stability in South Asia, and that it called for the international community to adopt a unified stand and strongly demand that India immediately stop development of nuclear weapons. China also found India's rationale of needing nuclear capabilities to counter a Chinese threat as totally unreasonable. I find this quite amusing, as China had been conducting nuclear tests continuously since 1964 up till 1996 itself. Canada strongly criticized this turn of events, while Japan imposed sanctions on India, consisting of freezing all new loans and grants except for humanitarian aid to India. The US was flabbergasted, and it led to the CIA publicly accepting that it was an intelligence failure on their end. As was expected, India faced a lot of economic and technological sanctions, and President Clinton unsuccessfully tried to pressure India into signing the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, also known as CTBT, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, both of which India refused to sign. France, UK, and Russia refrained from condemning India. And of course, Pakistan was yet again the most vocal and angry at this test. But they also ended up doing their own nuclear test a mere 15 days after India's last test on May 13th, and they too then faced the same kind of flashback and criticism as India did. Now, since India had been able to do this without anyone knowing, America was concerned that other countries might feel scared. So in response to this, India clarified that the country's history speaks for itself and that we have never attacked anyone first, and that our nuclear capabilities are more a deterrent than anything. India insisted on sticking to its no first use policy. Well, this was a roller coaster of a history ride, but if you're anything like me, you must have taken away a few things from this story. This was truly the work of many people, even generations of people, including politicians, scientists, policymakers, and the army. This was proof of what a country can achieve against all odds when it stands together. This was an act of defiance by India, where the country stood its ground and put its own needs over the so-called international ones, given the harsh reality of the geopolitics in the world. With two neighbors with whom the relations were sour and flimsy at best, a country as large and young as India really needed to protect itself. The larger superpowers and developed nations, namely the US and Russia in this case, were responsible for testing thousands of warheads and have manufactured 97% of the world's nuclear warheads during the Cold War. And even today, they hold 90% of the world's nuclear stockpile, while telling the world what to do and what not to do at the same time. This is hypocrisy at the finest, and I'm glad that my country didn't listen to their vested interests. And finally, India was able to do this under the educated leadership of scientists and engineers, people who truly built and pushed forward nations and civilizations, and not some pseudo-scientific mumbo-jumbo. This simply highlights how much we need to trust and be led by people who are experts in the fields of science, technology, and policy making. Whatever my country might be today, I'm not short-sighted enough to not see how far we have come in the last 73 years, and difficult as the times may be today, there still seems to be hope. During these difficult times, let's relish in some successes from the past, and let's spread some pride around. Thanks for sticking till the end, and I really hope this video made you feel educated and proud of India's difficult recent past. You can find links in the description that I encourage you to go through and form your own opinion. You can also find some videos around here that you might like, so do check them out. If you like what I do and you would like my channel to grow, then you can help me out by liking and sharing this video, subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell notification icon, and also leaving comments down below. Thank you for being here, and see you all next time. Namaste.